Hey y'all, it's Jennifer. Welcome back to my channel. Today, I am coming to you with a reading vlog. I'm currently in the middle of 3 books, and so I thought it would be a great time to start a vlog. It's actually also a Monday, and historically, I almost never start a weekly reading vlog on a day that makes sense. And so I just really wanted to celebrate that. Today is Monday. And so we're just getting started. Febregency is just kicking off. And so I am currently reading 3 things, and it's because I want to be one of those people who has like a hardcover book going at home, an ebook going to read during the lunch hour, and then also an audiobook on the go because I'm trying to take advantage of all of the time. Full disclosure, the past couple of weeks have been extremely low reading weeks for me. And actually, this is something I'm tracking this year in my Hobonichi, in my planner. I have been tracking each day that I read, and I read far less than what I initially thought I did. I for sure thought that I read more throughout the week, and particularly on the weekend, than what I do. And a lot of times it seems like reading time for me actually does occur more often during the week than it does on the weekends. And so I just think it's very odd. This is the only year that I have ever tracked that, like day to day, that I have been reading. And so I'm sure this is really something I can extrapolate and say is true of years past, but it's really shocking to me that I don't read as much as I do. But also, full disclosure, I've just been in a slump the past couple of weeks because I finished 2 5-star reads back to back in January, and I have been chasing that high ever since. So I wanted to pick up something that I thought was a shoo-in, something that I really thought is going to also be 5 stars. That is The Ballad of Never After by Stephanie Garber. So this is the second book in her series that started with Once Upon a Broken Heart. And I feel sure I'm gonna give this book 5 stars. This is the second book in a trilogy. And I know second books tend to have their problems. They tend to just kind of bridge the gap between the first and the third books. But I am going based on the knowledge that I rated the second book in the Caraval trilogy 5 stars, and the second book in the Caraval trilogy wound up being my favorite. So I'm basing all of my expectations on this book around that experience, but I think it's probably true. I've heard a lot of mixed opinions about this because I think when it first came out, a lot of people thought this was going to be a duology. And so the way that this book ends really left people shocked. So I am personally really excited by that. And I think I've done the right thing by waiting because it means that I have less time to wait for the end of the trilogy. But it also means that going into this, I remember literally nothing that is going on. Characters have been mentioned who I didn't even know existed. I really do not want to go back and reread the first book. I just don't want to do it. So I am hoping that I can find a really good summary online. If not, I'm just going to struggle through it. I really am, because I just don't have it in me to reread something right now. When I'm in a slump, rereading, that is just not helping me out, because if it's something that I know where it's going to go, why am I reading it? You know, that's definitely my motto in a slump. So I am going to power through this one. I am really enjoying it so far because it's really charming. I just wish that I could remember everything that happened in the first book. So that is something I would love to request from publishers. If you have a longer series, even if you just have a trilogy like this, maybe give us a couple of pages at the start of a new book that recaps what's happened previously. That would just be really helpful to me. My Febregency, also, just to be honest with you, has not gotten off to the greatest start. I have DNF'd something. And I also just recently read The Chinchi by Percy Shelley, which I enjoyed, but I didn't love. And I fully expected to rate that 5 stars. I gave it 3 stars. There were moments of brilliance there, don't get me wrong. It was really incredible in parts, but it was very short and it was a play, and I just don't get on with them very well. So I decided to pick up the novel that I had on my TBR, and that is The Private Memoirs and Confessions of a Justified Sinner by James Hogg. I am currently listening to this on audiobook, and let me tell y'all, this is a wild ride. I knew that this was going to be weird, and I knew that there was going to be something odd about the writing style, but I didn't know quite how odd. This is really hard to follow, but I am so glad that I have decided to pick it up on audio because this is a Scottish novel, and so it means a lot of the dialogue is written in dialect. I just can't do it. I cannot do it. I can fully understand someone speaking with a Scottish accent better than I can reading dialect. I do not know why it is a choice that writers continue to make. I know this was written 200 years ago, but let's move on from this. Just say they had a French accent or they had a Scottish accent. That's going to do it for me. So I think picking it up on audio was a smart choice, but I think it also means that I'm losing some of the detail here. This book is about a guy who is a staunch Calvinist. And so Calvinists believe you are predestined for salvation or damnation. And our main character believes he is predestined for salvation, and so he thinks he can essentially do whatever he wants and he can't jeopardize that. And so there is kind of like a devil character here. And so what's interesting is that this book really wants to have a religious conversation. That was what was also interesting about The Cinci by Percy Shelley, is that also really wanted to have a conversation about religion, specifically Protestant versus Catholic. This is having a conversation about Calvinism, and I don't necessarily think as a whole that the book is condemning religion. I think its issue is with Calvinism specifically, but I think the characters who are portrayed as being religious are portrayed with some nuance actually, and I thought, based on what I had read around this book, just based on the reception that it got when it was first published, I thought for sure there was just going to be something outrageously offensive in here. And so far it hasn't happened for me yet. I'm not saying it's not there. Maybe it is. Maybe I just am not there yet. But this is wild because the first half of this book is told from someone who observed this happening. And the second half of the book is actually going to be from the sinner's perspective. And this is kind of a Faustian deal in that there has definitely been communication with a devil-like figure. That has not been explained explicitly yet. I'm assuming that's going to come in the second half of this book. And I'm really looking forward to that because I think this is fascinating. I really do. But I think the format of splitting it in two means that we're going to get the same events twice. That is just an odd way to structure a story, in my opinion. And I think in general, the structure is weird. And I almost just don't even think the book has a plot. At this point, I am about 25%, I think, of the way through it in the audiobook. I don't even know what the plot of this is. It is very interesting, and I think thematically it's going to be very interesting. But I think if I were reading this physically, I would really be struggling. So I'm really glad that I made the choice to pick it up on audio. But this is another one that I'm currently reading. I will keep you abreast of this because I do think this is wild. I mean, I just think it's going to continue to get crazier and crazier. And I'm looking forward to it. I really, really loved in the introduction. I read one paragraph of the introduction. And then I put it down because I thought the introduction was definitely going to spoil the book. There's a conversation around a doppelganger in here, or your double, which is a Gothic concept. It's something that shows up in quite a few Gothic novels, and I am a sucker for it every single time. Please give me more doppelgangers. Please give me more doubles. Please give me more split selves. I adore it. I don't know what that says about me, but that is one of my favorite tropes in fiction. And I didn't really realize that this book was going to deal with that explicitly, but I thought it was so interesting. Here in the introduction, they talk about the fact that the double is more present in places that are not London or Paris or England or France more widely. This says, like much modern Scottish writing, James Hogg's masterpiece has more in common with works of German, Russian, or North American fiction than with anything produced in England, perhaps because radical experiments are more likely to be made in the provincial capitals of the world republic of letters than at its metropolitan core. The divided and doubled self haunts 19th century Edinburgh, Berlin, Philadelphia, or St. Petersburg more than Paris or London. I just started racking my brain trying to think of stories that I could think of with a double in them from Paris or London, and I really came up short. So I just think that's interesting. I think I am going to enjoy this book more for the conversations that it's going to allow me to have than I am with the story itself, if that makes any sense. I really think thematically something interesting is going on here, and I am always down for a discussion of religion. I am always down for a Faustian story. Always. And so I'm definitely going to read this to completion. I just don't think it's going to rate very highly for me because the writing style is so strange. This is one that I absolutely would not recommend you start with, because though it was written in the 1800s in the Regency period, it feels far more like an 18th century novel than it does a 19th century novel. And I think that makes it denser, but I think it also means that it's not nearly as approachable as some other works of this time period. So definitely in terms of Gothic novels, maybe not this one to start with, but I am excited about it. I'm excited to see where it goes. I'm going to continue listening to it. Last but not least, in honor of Valentine's Day, I just wanted to read romance. And I really wanted to pick up a Mariana Zapata book. I know I'm not going to like it. You know, I know that, but what if I do? That's the little voice in the back of my head is always saying, what if I do like contemporary romance? So if you have read her, I would love your suggestions down below, like where you think someone should start with her. I really do want to give her a try, but I decided to go with Neon Gods by Katee Robert, because I'm fresh off the Phantom of the Opera, and in so many ways, Phantom is a retelling of Hades and Persephone, so I just felt the calling to read another Hades and Persephone retelling. This is a book that has really taken off in the world of book talk. It is a Greek myth retelling. It is one in a series of different Greek myth retellings, and it is set kind of in an urban fantasy. It's set in like a modern city. Olympus is structured as a modern city. There are things like phones. I'm going to be real with you. That never works for me. That never works for me. But somehow it doesn't bother me right now at the point that I'm at in this story. I'm about 15% of the way through. So far, it doesn't actually bother me. But typically something that is taglined as an urban fantasy, like Crescent City by Sarah J. Maas, I just cannot. I cannot stand it. I cannot stand fantasy creatures using cell phones. It literally just causes my brain to implode. There's something about it that I just cannot take. And so this is really trying me, okay? It's really trying me, but the setup for this is that kind of the Greek gods are an inherited role. And so there is a new Hades, a new Zeus, a new Hera every now and again. Sometimes that's hereditary. Sometimes people elect someone to be one of the Greek gods. And so to me, the basis of the story is unique enough and different enough from Greek mythology that I'm willing to forgive it. I'm willing to go along with this. And so this setup is, of course, Hades and Persephone, but it's that Persephone was due to marry Zeus, and she really doesn't want to marry him. So she's kind of looking for an out, and that's how she gets involved with Hades. I am loving this, loving this, loving this. I think the writing is so good. And I have had actually pretty great experiences with books that have been talked up on Book Talk. I know a lot of people have done those reading vlogs where they read books that have gone viral on Book Talk and they're like, this was awful and why are people talking about it? I feel like I've had pretty good experiences with stuff that's been very popular on Book Talk. I hope this continues on because I feel like some of my other favorite myths are going to be retold in this series, and so I really want to see how that goes. So this is what I'm really excited about. And of the three, like if I was going to sit down and read tonight, I think I would choose Neon Gods. I am really enjoying it. And so that's definitely where I'm at right now. This is at the start of the week. I have no clue how the rest of the week looks in terms of reading or in terms of free time. So tonight I'm going to make fajita rice in the Instant Pot for dinner. It's really good. It's one of my favorite recipes. And I'll probably watch the White Lotus. I want to talk to y'all about White Lotus as a television show because it's one of the most bizarre shows I've ever seen. But the second season takes place in Sicily, so that's why I'm watching it. I'm watching it for some Italian scenery and crying because I'm not there. So I'll probably turn that on because I feel like I don't have to pay attention to it. I might read, but I will check in with you later when I have read more. Hopefully this is going to be the week that I get out of this reading slump. Okay, update time. I know I did good. Like, I started the blog on Monday, but today is Friday. So I haven't updated you since. But a lot of reading got done early in the week, but not so much here in the second half of the week. So big update is that I essentially have finished Neon Gods. I am almost at the end. I have completely devoured this. This is so compulsively readable. It's almost something that I can't put down. And I was sitting there reading it Monday night and it was 10:30. I was halfway through and I thought, can I possibly finish this tonight? And I have not felt like that in a very long time. It's been very rare for me to read a book that I thought, I can't put this down. And so I want to celebrate the book for that. I kind of cooled my jets a bit as we've moved towards the halfway point, because essentially, I think we all expected this. I think we all know what Neon Gods is about, kind of the big theme here. This is very much smut, and it is smut for the sake of smut. Let's just say it's not so much that I feel like the characters are having a great connection. They're just having sex. And I think for this to be truly a romance book, I think at this point, I would want to feel more between them, more connection between them as characters. Their whole plan is to kind of get together and get together publicly so that Zeus will no longer want Persephone. And essentially it is to sully her, like, in his eyes. So by default, the setup is that they're not going to have an emotional connection right off. Basically, all they have in common is that they don't like Zeus and they don't think she should marry Zeus. And I really like, on an individual basis, both of the characters. I just don't feel like I have a great handle on Persephone outside of not wanting to marry Zeus. She also doesn't really want to remain in Olympus as a city. And so I understand that, but it's kind of like, why? I don't really know personal motivations for you outside of this romance, which is very interesting at this stage. I am about 70% of the way through. So I've definitely had some gripes with it, but I just don't want to put the book down. Every time I'm reading it, I want to finish it. And when I'm not reading it, I'm thinking about it. So I'm definitely going to carry on with the series. One thing I want to say, though, is that Katee Robert, her grasp on Greek mythology, I'm not going to call it sloppy, but that's kind of what it is. I think if you are going into this with no prior knowledge to Hades or Persephone, to that myth at all, or if you're just going in not knowing very much about Greek mythology, you're not going to learn anything from this book, because she assumes a lot on the part of you as a reader, that you kind of know that Poseidon rules over the seas, that Hades rules over the underworld. It's almost not stated explicitly in this book what each of the gods do. I personally am fine with that, but I think if you were going into this hoping to learn something from it, maybe akin to Circe, you're not going to get the greatest grasp on Greek mythology. And literally, I was reading last night, there was one line and I can't get it out of my head and I can't forgive it. So they were talking about, like, going to eat gyros or something. And this guy as a cook is like, I can trace my line back to some guy in ancient Greece who was the head cook for Caesar. I just stopped reading and put the book down. I was like, that's something you could have Googled. Like, you could Google who Caesar is and know that he's a Roman figure. He's from the Roman Empire. He's not from ancient Greece. And in fact, like, the height of ancient Greece is nowhere near when Caesar was in power. And so I just think that was sloppy. That's something that easily could have been done by Googling. So that to me means that my faith in Katee Robert and her expertise on Greek mythology is maybe not the highest, but are we reading this to learn? Not really. We're reading this for romance. And I'm having a great time with it. Honestly, I am. Honestly, I am. And I'm definitely going to continue with the series. I think this was initially a series that lived on Kindle Unlimited. And so I'm not sure that it was ever professionally passed over initially, but now it has broken out of that sphere and it is traditionally published. But that line is still included in the edition that I'm reading. I cannot believe it. Next, we need to talk about the private memoirs and Confessions of a Justified Saint. I would say I am about halfway through this, and I am no clearer on things than I was in my initial update. I think a lot of this book is just confusing. I do want to say in favor of it there is some really beautiful language around nature in this. There's a lot of really gorgeous descriptions because this takes place in Edinburgh. And so there's been like gorgeous descriptions of Arthur's seat and just kind of the area around Edinburgh. Even just the description of the city itself has been really dreamy to me. But on a character level, this just feels very archetypal. And so in many ways, I do think this feels more 18th century than it does 19th century, which is interesting to say because that's kind of when this book is set, is the cusp of the 17th century going into the 18th century. And so maybe James Hogg was trying to mimic something like Tom Jones in style, just where I feel like I'm at arm's length from the characters. I feel like a lot of 18th century novels are struggles for me because of that. And so I feel at arm's length here, and I feel like this book is more about the message and more about exploring a theme that James Hogg wanted to explore than it is a character story or just in general a novel. So I am far more interested in this on a thematic level than I am in what's actually going on. And in fact, I think it would have been interesting as a group read or as a book club pick because I am far more interested in discussing this with someone than I am in just reading the book. And I think I would be getting more out of it were this a buddy read with someone, because I think the book really wants you to have conversations. Right now, I just don't think I can give it more than a 3-star. I do want to say, I think the language is approachable, and if you've never read anything from this period, I think you could read it based on the language, on the prose style. But in terms of just setup, this is really confusing. So I'm not really too sure on this. But really the reason that I haven't finished anything, that I haven't continued reading kind of in a haze this week, is that I did continue on with the White Lotus, and it's in Sicily. And yes, I still have complaints about the show. Like, I felt like the first season was completely pointless. Second season had more of a point, more of a plot, but basically the second season is set in Taormina, Sicily. I didn't know this place existed. I didn't know this place was real. I'm depressed. Like, I finished every episode of the show depressed. I think about it all the time. Like, I have 3 brain cells remaining this week. One of them is focused entirely on the fact that I am not in Sicily, and I should be. I should be there. I'm really depressed. I can't believe that that place exists. Truly, heaven is a place on earth. So I feel like I'm about to go into some Italian literature, start reading some Italian set fiction, because I really wish I was in Italy right now. Specifically, I wish I was in Taormina, Sicily. Please ignore what's going on behind me. We are in the midst of kind of doing seasonal transition for the wall art, but it is Sunday, so I just wanted to go on and wrap up the weekly reading vlog because I do have updates. So this week has been up and down in terms of reading, in terms of literally just having time to read, because there's been so much going on. And believe it or not, I think I said it earlier, but believe it or not, February is actually a busier month for me than January was. So I really don't foresee myself having much time to read in the rest of the month. I think it's probably going to be on par, but I did finish both of the books that I was in the middle of. I made a decision about the Ballad of Never After. I was so lost reading the first 3 chapters of that I just put it down. And I said, I'm gonna have to reread the first book anyway. That's clear to me. But the 3rd book, the final book in the trilogy, comes out in September. And I know that sounds like, wow, that's a really long time away. It's really not. It's probably around 6 months from now that I think the book comes out. I think it comes out in early September. And so I just went ahead and put it down for the time being, and I intend to reread the first book, then read the second, and then automatically move into the 3rd when it comes out. I think that's smart. I think I can wait 6 months to read it, and I think it'll probably be beneficial to me because really in that amount of time, I will also forget what I just read in the second book. So I think this is gonna work out. So I did finish Neon Gods, finished it in a fugue state Friday. It was incredible. And part of me desperately wanted to give the book 5 stars. I don't think it deserves it because there were so many oddities about it. And what's shocking to me is that the book made the jump from indie publishing to traditional publishing. So why that wasn't cleaned up is beyond me. I talked a lot about like that reference to Caesar that really got under my skin. And there was something else there at the very end of the book that I thought, she just didn't Google it. So that part of me couldn't give it 5 stars. And another part of me just didn't really believe in truly a romantic connection or an emotional connection between the main characters until there at the very end. But I am just a sucker for a Hades and Persephone retelling, and I thought this was really interesting. I thought it turned a lot on its head. I thought it did play very well with the character archetypes that Hades and Persephone have in mythology. And I think it also really set up their characters in an interesting way. Like thinking back, I do think the romance was authentic. I think the characterization was authentic. And I think how they came together as a couple was really great, because some things that irritate me in romance weren't present here. Specifically, kind of like that third act breakup. There was really nothing like that here, because the characters were so open with each other and were so honest with each other for the most part, that a lot of the things that irritate me in other romance books just weren't present here because there wasn't that same level of miscommunication. So clearly I really, really enjoyed it. My issue is that it just took me a long time to get invested in them as characters and to see them as their own characters outside of the romance, if that makes any sense. And I know that's weird to say because the book is a romance. It's clearly about them getting together. But the romances that I have really loved have invested me in the characters before they got together. I think I must want more of a slow burn, and this book did not give it to me. It did in an emotional sense, but not in a physical sense. And I think that must be key for me as well. And so I'm just learning about myself. I'm learning what I prefer in romance. If I'm going to read romance, I feel like I like particular things. And so it's helpful for me to learn what those are. At any rate, I automatically bought the second book and I started reading it. This is an Eros and Psyche retelling. Here for it. I'm going to be obsessed. A book that I wound up being pretty disappointed by and that I absolutely was not engaged in was The Private Memoirs and Confessions of a Justified Sinner. This is my big read of the month for Febregency, and I just did not get on with this in any way, shape, or form. And I think I had early positive feelings because of how beautiful some of the writing was. But I'll be honest with you, I finished this yesterday. I automatically had to look up the Wikipedia page and reread everything that happened, read the summary over again to see if I missed something, and it really felt like I did. I felt like I got more from the Wikipedia page than I did from the book. And so I was not connected with this in any meaningful way. I certainly wasn't connected with the characters. And when you go on Goodreads, you see a lot of kind of Marmite book reviews. People either love or hate this. I really didn't feel like I hated it, but I certainly didn't love it. And really reflecting on the experience, it's already forgettable to me. I already can't remember characters' names. I can't remember what happened. And some of that could be that I listened to it on audiobook, and that's just not as memorable an experience to me as reading physically. And I think the reasons that people hate it make sense. And I can see why people hate it from a religious standpoint, that you feel like the author is really critiquing religion. And I didn't necessarily feel like that, because I actually thought the characters who were shown to be very faithful were shown in a relatively good light. I think what was interesting was just kind of the discussion of Calvinism and certain sects of Christianity. And that was interesting, but it wasn't enough for me to be engaged in this book. In fact, I dreaded picking it up. It really took a lot out of me, and it was not enjoyable to read at all. I think had I hated it, it would at least have had that going for it. I at least could have been hate reading it. Instead, I was partially bored, but mostly confused by this, genuinely confused by the structure of the novel. And I think reading it in audio did not help that, but reading it in audio helped me with the dialect that most of the characters spoke in. And so you win some and you lose some. I really was glad to have had the audiobook. This just was not for me. And I think it's really hard for me to admit that, because I tend to like stuff that was written during this time. And I had very high hopes for this. It was this or Melmoth the Wanderer for Febregency this year, and I think probably Melmoth is the one that I should have pinned all my hopes and dreams on. This was just not for me. Just not for me. And I think I can't give it any higher than 2 stars. I really can't. And I think it's not at all a place to start. I know I said that earlier, that the language was approachable, and that's true. The prose is approachable. it is not approachable in the way the book is structured. I think something very interesting was done here, and like, I want to know why James Hogg structured the book this way, because it was just split down the middle, partially from the center's perspective, partially from someone else's perspective in the first half. We had to relive events twice, which I get the point of, but it just was tedious to me. So I just did not get on with this. I really did not. And so this was kind of a disappointment to me. In fact, I really contemplated DNFing it. So this was just not for me. But we did have a success. We had a success and a failure in the same vlog, so that's okay by me. I did want to read something for Valentine's Day this year, and I did. And it was wonderful. But I do think I will wrap up the vlog here because it is Sunday. And so tonight's the Super Bowl. I'm getting ready to have little Super Bowl goodies. And it's a very rainy, icy day outside. Really wonderful. So I think I might settle in and read something else this afternoon, but it's going to be totally different from either Neon Gods or the private memoirs, confessions of a justified sinner. I think I need to give my brain a break from both romance and from classics. I would love to know down below if you have read any of these. I would love to know how your Febregency is going, but that's going to be all from me today. I hope you're all having a great week. Happy reading. Goodbye.